So welcome everyone. My name is Philip from Lübeck, and it's a great pleasure to be co-hosting this thing here online with you, Patty. And really what we're doing here is we're recording part of what we will be presenting in 2 weeks' time in New Orleans for the ACBS World Conference. And the idea is to give those who will be attending a chance to prepare, but then also to revisit what they have heard. And our goal for the session in New Orleans is to give you a very lively impression how you can deliver more powerful ACT intervention with a very up-to-date theory of mental phenomena, which is called the predictive coding theory. And Patty, do you want to say a few words before I start?
No, it's just been a lot of fun to work with Philip on this presentation, and I think it's deepened my understanding of this approach. And I've worked with Kirk and Strassel on this, and, and you know, sat beside him as he wrote a book about it with others. And I think it's inspiring. I think it's exciting to have this available to further our understanding and I think enhance our creativity as ACT clinicians. Thanks, Philip.
Yeah, that's really what it does. Enhances creativity, kind of opens up new possibilities. And if you are interested in the slides we'll be presenting, you can download them here using a QR code. And what I will hope to be doing in the coming, about 20 minutes is I would like to show you how this predictive coding theory thing we're presenting today is embedded in the CBS framework, how it can enhance process-based acceptance and commitment therapy. And then I want to kind of give you a deep dive into what predictive coding theory is, and then we'll seg to Patty's presentation, where she will give the more practical application of how predictive coding theory can be used in ACT. And what we'll be doing in New Orleans is we briefly repeat what we're presenting now and then demonstrate role plays how this can be done. So that New Orleans will, in addition to what we're doing now, will have the practical aspects. And so that's us. And that's our disclosures. And as Patty has already mentioned, really this what we will be presenting today builds on other material. And I have first come across predictive coding theory from work by Lisa Feldman Barrett, who will also be presenting in New Orleans at the conference. And this is one of her books, and the link below, you can see some of her videos explaining predictive coding theory from her perspective. And then, as Patty mentioned, Kirk Strassel, he has written an excellent book, both on applying predictive coding theory to a broad range of psychological phenomena, and then also implementing it in a very humane way. So it's really been, for me, one of the most intensive books that I have read in the past couple of years. I highly recommend it. And if you want to get a preview of their idea, you can also use the link below, which will lead you to a video of Patty and Kirk on the ACBS website, where they are presenting the idea in more detail. So if you look at what we'll be doing from a bird's eye view, is what predictive coding theory does for you is it will give you a very current state of the art understanding of psychological phenomena. And the core message is what's happening up here, mental phenomena are not passive reactions to our environment, but rather what we do, even if we just perceive something, is we're actively creating perception, emotion, and other mental phenomena. So they're not just a passive reaction um, to what's happening out in the world. They are an active creation by us. That's kind of the main message of predictive coding theory. And what Kirk and Patty have beautifully done is showing us that from this perspective, the symptoms that patients come to us with aren't really symptoms that we need to get rid of, but rather signals, signals that can help individuals move in the direction they want to move in their lives. Now, they don't see it that way from the outset, but you can help them view their symptoms as signals that will help them guide their life in a chosen direction. That's kind of what, in a nutshell, I will try and explain. And what I hope you will be able to see is that this fits nicely with the more general framework of contextual behavioral sciences, in that predictive coding theory really gives you a very, very few principles that help you understand a broad range of psychological phenomena. And it does so very well in keeping with other theories and the basic theories of CBS and ACT and PBT. And the way that I would like to embed it is in a process-based way, in a way that starts from the understanding that really what we have in the hexaflex are the different psychological processes that we try and help our patients to use in a flexible way. And one way of looking at the flexibility is that flexibility will help us live more adaptive lives, will help us adapt to ongoing changes in our lives, internal and external changes, adapt to those changes in a way that we can move our lives in a chosen direction and reach stable equilibria on the way. And to do that, we need what is called in process-based therapy variation, selection, and retention in context. Variation, selection, retention, and context of these psychological processes. And I hope towards the end of the presentation, it will become clearer what I mean by that. But let's start at the beginning. If you ask yourself, prior to predictive coding theory, what would be your theory of mental phenomena? And the easiest way to explain this is use the mental phenomenon of perception. And most people would think that I perceive something because it represents something that's present out in the world. That would be like the classical view of perception and also of other mental phenomena. And I will use an image that I've taken from one of the presentations of Lisa Feldman-Barrett to show you that maybe it is a bit more complex than that. What I would like you to do is look at this image and try and see what's there. And what your brain is probably doing right now is it's looking at this image and it's trying to extract meaning from what you're seeing. What your brain is probably doing right now is it is comparing what your sensory input is with prior experiences, trying to understand what you're seeing here. And I've done this in numerous trainings and also with patients, and many of them see a ghost down here on the lower left corner. You know, the eyes here, and the mouth. And some of you will probably also see other things. And but it will probably be difficult for you to make sense of the entire picture because you haven't seen something, something similar before because your brain isn't sure what to compare this to. And now I suppose you can see what all these blobs represented. And even if I go back to the earlier picture, you will probably still see the bee. And what has changed? What has changed is that now you have a prior mental model that helps you interpret the stimuli coming from the outside, and they will help you with your sensory perception. So I think this is a very simple example that nicely demonstrates what we perceive is not simply a representation of the present, um, but it is a computational compromise between what's out there in the present moment and what we predict might be there. And you can really expand that to all kinds of mental processes. For instance, you could think about what is thirst from this perspective. So you have the mental phenomenon of thirst, and that arises because your senses of your electrolytes in your bodily fluids, they notice that there's a change in your electrolytes in your bodily fluids from the set point, what your brain expects the electrolytes to be. And if that changes, you will notice that as thirst. Probably what most people would do then is take a wee sip, drink something. So what that tells us is that most of the prediction up here is sameness. Your brain predicts that things are going to stay the same, and most of your mental phenomena are when this prediction that things will stay the same is violated, and that's called a prediction error. Now, you have several options of responding to those prediction errors. So if my electrolyte content in my bodily fluids is different from my prediction, I can take a glass of water and drink a sip, and that will hopefully regulate it. And what I'm doing in predictive coding terminology here is I'm changing the world to fit the model. That's what most people do. When what the sensory input is sending them does no longer fit the model, they will notice it and do something to make the world fit the model. And we are so used to doing that that we tend to forget that there's also another way of dealing with it, and that is changing the model to fit the world. And that might be more important with our patients. That and I try and give an example to illustrate what I mean by that. First of all, it is easy to change the model to fit the world if we're dealing with exteroception, with something that's happening outside of us. So I suppose after you saw the bee, most of you no longer really saw the ghost there, but were able to focus on the bee. So you changed the model based on what you subsequently learned about what's really there. Now, that is more difficult with our internal experiences. Because with our internal experiences, we can't really kind of open up our body and see what's there to adapt our model to fit the world. So, for instance, if I have a funny feeling in my tummy, what my brain is doing is it's trying to come up with predictions, with explanations, with meaning, what's happening there. And if we were together here in a room, I would invite you to come up with ideas what the funny feeling in my tummy is about. And you would probably say, well, maybe it's because you're anxious. You just told us you're anxious. Or in a different context, it could be maybe it's because you're in love. Or it could be you have eaten something that wasn't really good and maybe you need to throw up. Or it could be a sign of a cancer. So it's very difficult for us to come. Oh, for most of us, it's not difficult to come up with an answer, but for our patients, some of them they lack this emotional vocabulary. So whenever they feel something inside of them in the interoceptive world, they probably stick to those more disease-oriented explanations when it's difficult for them to come up with a emotional explanation. And I want to give you a concrete example from our work here. I'm mostly focusing on psychosomatics here. And one patient with whom this model really, really helped me was um, a, a female in her early 30s. And she came to us because she has lost a lot of weight, because she had more or less stopped eating. And it wasn't an eating disorder. She wasn't afraid of food or afraid of becoming fat or something like that. Wasn't associated with problems in Körperbild. What's the word? It was body image. But her problem was that a couple of months ago, she developed a fear that she might choke and suffocate. And first she had that fear with eating solids. And then she also had those fear with, pureed food and soups, and then later liquids, till when she came to us, she was even afraid of swallowing her saliva. So from this model's point of view, she had this internal stimulus, this feeling of choking. And her mental model was, that must mean that there's something physically wrong with me. So she experienced that as danger of suffocating. And she changed the world to fit the model. She ate, she stopped eating solids and pureed food, then soup and drinks, till she got to the point where she was even afraid of swallowing her saliva. And one thing that model really did for me when I was working with her is I was able to not so much focus on what sense she made out of the situation, but rather focus her attention on what she was actually noticing here in her throat, helping her raise awareness of what's happening here. And then also helping her question her predictions. Because her prediction was, if I eat something, I will choke and suffocate. And the only way to keep me safe is to refrain from eating and drinking. And I said to her, well, your head tells you this is how you keep safe. But what does your experience tell you? And then we slowly, slowly learned to, or she slowly, slowly learned not to rely so much on those predictions, but rather listen to what's actually there. And in the course of the treatment, we started talking about, well, when had this choking sensation started? And she said, well, it started a few months after my father died. And we asked her, in those kind of life circumstances, what other meaning could this feeling in your throat have? Have you heard about people having a lump in their throat when they're sad? So over time, we helped her get in touch with a new mental model of what this internal stimuli might mean. That she's, and then she could experience this as a new mental state, not as a danger state, but as a state of sadness, which could reconnect her to her values, what she really wanted in life, and focus her life back on that. I mean, the real treatment was a bit more complicated than that. I'm kind of summarizing it now for didactic purposes, but that is really one of those treatments where this model helped me a lot. And I suppose what you might have noticed now that I've talked about it is that you can attach many of the words we're already using in ACT and PBT to this model. And I will just give a few examples. We could, talk about a lot more in detail, but I suppose what you see I did with her is I trained cognitive flexibility, not to trust so much her mind when it tells her this feeling means I'm in danger. The only way to keep safe is to refrain from swallowing solids and liquids and da da da. I help her diffuse from that mental model. And I try to help her focus her attention on what she's actually experiencing here and engage in committed action. Eat again, even if her mind tells her not to. And what that did is that she was able to reconnect with a different motivation. Not the old motivation, I have to stay away from danger, but rather to the motivation that maybe what I'm feeling here tells me that I'm sad about the passing of my father. And really, I have this strong longing to connect, and I have to do something about that rather than doing something about avoiding all these foods to stay out of danger. So what I'm trying to do here is help you see that you can see our ACT processes, or you can see different psychological phenomena and psychological processes through this predictive coding lens. And what Patty is going to do next is try and help you to bring this in a more actionable sequence. So in a way, what I did with this patient is I tried to contextualize with her, get back to what she's feeling there, and then assess and expand, assess what meaning she made out of those experiences and try to help her kind of diffuse from this old meaning and find a new way of dealing with it and thus expanding her life. So what I'm trying to do here is map this care model that Patty's going to present to you now on this predictive coding graph that I've drawn. And I will stop the recording here because we decided to cut the recordings in two parts. In case you got bored with my presentation, you could then move on to Patty's presentation.